All right. Looks like people are making their way in. Why don't we go ahead and get started? First off, hope everybody is doing well today and staying safe and healthy out there. Certainly an unprecedented time for everyone individually, the companies that you may be working for, community that you may be a part of. Um, Thanks again for joining us for this community webinar. We started the community webinar program as a way to share on topics that are relevant and of interest to our community, learn from one another, all for the purpose of being that much more informed and empowered to do whatever it is that we're required to do to help our companies, clients, teams be successful. This topic we thought was very timely for our community in that we're calling it best practices for remote work during COVID-19 and beyond. Certainly COVID-19 has impacted all of us here in some shape or form. A large impact given that a lot of people are confined to their homes or away from their workplaces. Is the concept of working remotely and how to be respectively productive, happy, healthy, and equally engaged through that experience. We put this together in a pretty short amount of time, thinking that the community would benefit as immediately as possible. In order to put this together, we thought the best way to go about it was to have our ERG. We have an ERG program, employee resource group, and one specifically dedicated to remote work. And so in our ERG, those that work in a remote capacity get together and talk about and share in a variety of best practices related to the topic. So for this webinar, we invited the leads of our remote ERG, Sahar and Lauren, to share with us, carrying the tone of by the people, for the people, sort of an experience. Given that we're all in this together in some shape or form, again, we thought getting the group together would provide for the greatest amount of benefit. From a logistics perspective, we could expect the sharing of content to run about 20 to 30 minutes. So we'll keep it pretty light. And then we'll then give it the remaining time for Q&A. A number of great questions were submitted upon registration, and then we expect a number of others to come through. So as you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Feel free to pop them into Q&A, and we'll make sure to get those turned around. And then finally, this is being recorded. We will share this out to everyone in attendance and to everyone who registered. So you'll have all this content. With that, there's some great content on each of the slides. Feel free to screen capture, and otherwise enjoy, and excited to be spending this time together. So with that, I'll pass it over to Zahar and Lauren to take it from here.
Hi, I'm Lauren. So today, kind of following up on what Boris said, we're going to be covering some data, some tips and resources, and mental health. First, we actually wanted to kick it off with a poll for you. We wanted to know how many of our participants are currently 100%, prior to now, how many of our participants were 100% remote, working remote 1 to 2 days a week, 1 to 2 days a month, and 100% in the office. This will give us a really good idea of how things have obviously shifted over the last couple of weeks. So we'll give you a second to send in your response. Did everybody have a chance to answer the poll? I'm not seeing the responses pop up, but oh, there we go. Okay, cool. So pretty interesting breakdown here. A lot of people have either been remote the whole time, or they're kind of used to 1 to 2 days a week. Really helpful for me to know, obviously, if you're a work from home veteran or if you're a newbie. So 17% of you have always been in an office. So I think this will be really, really helpful for you. Some of it might be a refresher, but hopefully at the end of this, you will come out with some peace of mind. So a couple of data points that we wanted to go through specifically. The first two are obviously prior to COVID-19. So one of this first piece of information, obviously you can see here, was asking if people would like to work from home for the rest of their career or for at least some point of time. Just a couple of short months ago, 99% of people said that they would love to work from home at least some part of the time or for the rest of their time. We think that this number is going to change drastically over the next couple of months. You don't always realize some of the struggles that are coming with working from home. It's definitely easy to say, hey, yeah, that would be great. I get to work from home. I don't have to commute. And, yes, those things are great, but there's definitely a lot of struggles that do come with working from home. So this again is from 2019. So we think that some of these things might shift around a little bit. The first one, 22% of people struggle with unplugging after work. 19% struggle with loneliness, 17% collaboration and communication, and 10% struggle with distractions at home. Again, I think everybody is probably sitting there smirking to themselves about something in particular, and how we think that these numbers will change. I'm going to assume that distractions at home are definitely going to go up. And specifically the 22% of unplugging after work, we have already seen that it has increased. So here is the facts to kind of prove that working from home is, you're struggling to unplug. This was released by Bloomberg just yesterday. And you can take a look. I want everybody to kind of see where things have changed, where maybe they haven't, and why they have or haven't changed. But as you can see, in the US, people are working an average of 3 hours more a day than they were just even 2 or 3 weeks ago. That's a 40% increase in time over just this short amount of time. So we are going to kind of talk about some of the ways that you can, alleviate some of those extra workings. But here you go. If you found yourself nodding in agreement, what are you currently struggling with the most? And if you're feeling positive and feeling great, we would absolutely love for you to share that with us as well. So take a second, answer the poll, and then we'll move on a little bit. And if you feel all of these things at some point throughout the day, that's totally normal too. I'm sure you're not alone in that bucket either. Once we get the responses, let's see what those look like. Yep, I kind of figured keeping yourself motivated in this time is definitely a big one. Feelings of isolation, reliable workspace. Cool. So I'm actually going to kick it over right now to Sahar. She's going to talk about how you can keep yourself sane, productive during these crazy and unprecedented times. Sahar, take it away.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I mean, I myself have been working remotely, either fully remotely or partially for over a year now. So these are just some of the tips and tricks that have worked for me in my experience with remote work. So when I first started remotely, I will admit I was one of those people who rolled out of bed and started working right away. I would really advise not to do that if you can help it. It really does lead to a lot of burnout. So one of my biggest tips is just maintaining a normal routine. Take your mornings as if you were still going to work, wake up, have breakfast, feed your dog, use some of the time you would spend commuting to work out or read a chapter of a book, take some alone time, before starting your day, it'll really help you structure yourself and feel like you're still going into the office. When it's time to start working, move into your workspace and get to it. I would also really recommend ending your day at the same time you would normally if you were leaving the office. It's really easy to just keep working, and before you know it, it's 8:30 and you haven't had dinner and you've gotten a lot done, but it really kind of throws off your work-life balance. So those would be some of the tips that I would recommend for maintaining a normal routine. I would also say make sure that you're using your calendar as best as you can. My calendar is my best friend. I talk to people who are in different time zones, so I use it to block off my schedule so that they know when I will be online working. I also use it to block off heads down time where I just really want to focus on a task and I won't be answering Slacks. I also schedule in time for breaks, time for meetings, time for checking email and responding to Slacks and checking in with my coworkers. It helps give my day some more structure and it helps keep me on track. That way I'm not just jumping from one task to another with no rhyme or reason. Yeah. Okay. And then make sure you're setting some clear expectations and over communicating with your team. One of the biggest challenges of being remote is not having the ability to just tap someone on the shoulder and ask them a question, and to talk to maybe your managers or your peers in person. So take this time to chat with your manager and with your team and really figure out which is going to be the best way to keep each other up to date on what's going on in your work life. So whether that's having like a weekly one-on-one with your manager or having a stand-up meeting every Monday to talk about your goals or what you're struggling with or what you want to accomplish this week, it'll help give your managers visibility into what you're working on, and it'll just help give you an idea of what your team is doing as well. I would also say set clear expectations over responding to each other. Just because you're working from home doesn't mean you have to answer every single Slack and every single email the second you get it. That's very unrealistic. So just talk to your manager, let them know. If you'll be using statuses to kind of let the team know when you're in a meeting, when you're on a call, when you're taking a break, making some lunch, that'll really help kind of clear up any uncertainty. And oh yeah, there's another slide. So one of my favorite parts of being remote is the ability to build out my day in whichever way that I want. If I want to take all my meetings earlier in the morning, if I want to have sourcing time late in the afternoon, I can really structure that for myself. If you ever feel unsure about what you should be working on, check in with your manager. I've definitely had those instances where I need a little bit more guidance, and checking in just really helps give me a clear picture of what to tackle first, what's at the top of my to-do list. And then also make sure that you set in some breaks too. You need to be taking daily breaks. And another thing that's work that I forgot to mention is using a tracker with your team so that everyone knows what you're working on your project, and it'll help eliminate some of that uncertainty with who might be covering what or taking care of what on a project. Yay. Okay. So another thing that has been huge for me is distractions. I get distracted very easily. I'm one of those people that as soon as I hop off a meeting, I'm like, oh, I wonder what's new on Instagram. Definitely try to put your phone away. If I'm not on a call, I try to keep my phone in a drawer or in another room so that I don't check it and get distracted. I like to take tech-free breaks where I'm not on my computer or my phone so I can really take a mental break. Also, try to turn the TV off. Give your dog a bone so that they can hang out for a little bit if it's an important meeting and you won't be able to attend to them. Those are all things that will really help you just stay on track, kind of pretend like you're still in the office day to day. Another thing is to make sure that you prioritize your day. I'm one of those people that keeps a running to-do list, and sometimes everything seems like it'll be really important to get done right then and there. So I like to kind of sit down at the beginning of my day and think of the top 3 things that I have to try to accomplish. It'll give me just more of an idea of like what to tackle first, what's the most important. I also try to keep time zones in mind when I'm doing this so that I'm not pinging my coworkers super early California time, and so that they're not pinging me when I'm having dinner on the East Coast. Leaning into company culture has been a huge part of my experience at Bink. When I started, I was remote, and so I really had to try to get to know my coworkers in a much different setting than I was used to previously. And I found that during this pretty uncertain time, that's also really helped. You're not alone in this, and make sure that you're reaching out to one another. I've developed really close relationships with my coworkers across the country because of our company culture. So make sure that you're still celebrating each other's wins. Reach out to each other if you're having a difficult day or if you're struggling on a project or something specific. Keep open communication with your managers and attend meetings as if you would normally. So if your company has any ERGs, if you guys have any meetings to just hang out, make sure that you attend those so that you still feel connected to your coworkers and like you're with them every day. And I would also say, more than anything, be really patient with each other. Things have been really weird, and a lot of people are moving to full work from home, and it's not just you. You might have roommates, you might have your significant other or kids or pets running around. Everyone's in the same boat, which is kind of nice. So just try to be really patient with yourself, with your loved ones at home, with your coworkers. You never know what their situation might look like, and a little bit of patience goes a really, really long way. Okay, and then finally, let's talk about some tools and technology that'll help you adjust a little bit better. I personally love my AirPods. They're my best friend. I use them for all my calls, all my meetings. I'm using different headphones right now, but my AirPods are next to me. Some people like using noise canceling headphones. Some people really like having a wireless mouse. I've spoken to some people who have ordered themselves really cool standing desks. So if that's something that works for you and you have the space for it, then go for it. Yeah. And then some resources that you might already be using in your everyday work life, but I'm a huge, huge fan of Slack. I also really, really like Evernote. It helps keep me on track. I like creating different notes and keeping track of what I have to do. These are just a few of the many, many tools that you could use. But if you guys have any other suggestions, like slide them into the comments and people will see. And with that, I will pass it back over to Lauren to talk about mental health.
Cool. So I think mental health kind of encompasses so many different things right now, especially working from home and being quarantined inside your house is definitely something that you struggle with. So I know that when we mentioned before, you don't always know what's going to come with actually working from home, but this current climate makes it so much worse sometimes. So a lot of the problems that we're seeing right now revolve around anxiety, depression. Your work is spread out everywhere because you might not have had like a previously determined workspace. Obviously, we're seeing that people are not shutting down at normal times, so you can't shut your brain down 24/7. You feel a little bit more like a hermit, and you're, struggling with some loneliness and unhealthy sporadic meals. So some of the things around those, we have some great ideas and great tactics for you. First and foremost, designate a workspace. If you don't have a spare bedroom where you can actually set up an office, like me, I don't know if you can see what's behind me, but this means I'm at my kitchen counter. So what I do is I have a stand-up, sit-down desk that I can kind of adjust myself for my posture. And then at the end of the day, I close my computer and I completely put it to the side so that I have my kitchen counter back to normal. But designating that workspace is really, really helpful because you're going to feel like you have a start and an end to your day. And like Sahar said, that's incredibly important. Can't shut down your brain. I know that I myself am one of those people whose brain just like runs rampant all the time, regardless if it's work or personal. And yes, life is stressful right now. Work, especially at the end of the day, if it's not something that's a 100% fire drill that needs to be taken care of now, write yourself a note, put it on the top of your laptop, answer it tomorrow. If it is a fire drill, okay, make the exception, shoot that email, take care of that thing that you need to do right now, just so you don't forget and it's not going to sit there in your head and drive you crazy the whole entire time. But some of those resources that Sahar said in the last slide, Evernote or Asana or something to keep yourself organized will be really, really helpful here. Get your people fixed. Obviously, we're having to get creative with how we are actually getting those people fixed. But this is something that Bink has always been so incredible at, because we have had such a diversified workforce, but virtual lunches are now on the calendar almost weekly or twice weekly. We're doing probably 1 to 2 happy hours a week now virtually. We are keeping in mind that people are in different time zones. So we'll have an earlier one for those who are on the East Coast and then a later one for those that are on the West Coast. Definitely something to keep in mind. Take a virtual class, take your pet for a walk as long as you can take them for a walk. FaceTime your parents. They probably are always complaining that they don't hear from you enough anyway. Calling family members is definitely a really great way to get that people fix. Like I said, Bink has always been great at this. So if you wanted to start an ERG at your company, any type of employee resource group is going to be beneficial to anybody right now. I think we have about 4 or 5 that we're pretty active on. And one thing that I can say is like the best tip for starting an ERG would be ask your attendees what they're interested in. For us on our remote ERG that we do on a monthly basis, we'll poll the group and we'll say, hey, how are you guys feeling about this like open concept? They give their ideas, or hey, do you prefer that we have this one be a little bit more structured? If we want it to be structured, we come in with a topic, we're prepared, and then we talk about that specific thing. And it's just a really good opportunity for people to be, 1, outside of the work mode, 2, kind of be a little bit distracted on what's going on in the actual outside environment. But it's a really, really great safe space for a lot of people. So getting your people fixed that way virtually has been super beneficial. Preparing your meals in advance. I know Sahar had mentioned this earlier as like a major tip. When you're starting your day, now that you don't have commute time, you should be treating yourself to coffee. You should be actually having breakfast. You should be preparing your meals for the day. Sometimes I know we're all guilty of this, and we've talked about this 1,000 times over. I just ate my first meal of the day right before we started this, and that was 1 o'clock for me. So I'm not taking my own advice, but everybody else should. I did actually start my dinner though. I've got a crock pot going right now. It's my first time in 2 years of pulling my crock pot out. So get your meals ready in advance. It'll be super, super helpful. And just a couple of other positive actions for improved mental health right now. Obviously, it's super important to keep your mind and body healthy. You'll be a better employee and a better person and spouse and partner and anything like that. Exercise regularly. The Binkers have actually put together a list of resources that are gyms providing free classes, whether it's like downloaded or an actual live class. So there's a ton of resources there. We're happy to share that list if that would be helpful to people. Get outdoors and get some fresh air. If you've got a little patio and can sit outside for 5 minutes a day, great. If you have a dog, perfect excuse to get yourself outside. Again, like Sahar said, take breaks. Leave the guilt behind. Everybody else is taking a break. You'll be a better employee if you're refreshed instead of just sitting here dreading what you're doing for 10 hours. Leave that guilt behind and get up and get your body moving. Take some time to meditate. Maintain a consistent sleep schedule. And last but not least, ask for help. Everybody else is in this together right now. So there's just like a ton of resources. Everybody is maybe feeling like they don't want to say that they are in the same boat as you, but they definitely are. So if you need accountability buddy, reach out to somebody who, you feel comfortable telling them, hey, I'm struggling. I need I need help with motivation. Nobody is going to shame anybody about what they're going through right now. It's just so important to keep your mind and your body healthy too right now. So those are some of the tips and tricks that we've come up with. And yeah, we're going to pass it over to Tawny right now for some questions.
Thank you, Lauren and Sahar, for sharing your experiences with us and some great tips. We went through that kind of quick because during registration, we asked for everyone to submit questions that you would like us to cover during this webinar. And there were a lot of great questions that went through, that came through. So we want to make sure that we are able to answer as many as possible. So I will be asking some questions. We're pulling Boris back in to help with some of the other questions. And then if you have any other questions that you would like answered, please just go ahead and ask them in the chat or use the Q&A feature of Zoom. So the first question, it's going to be geared towards Lauren. Do you have any advice on how to eliminate my guilty feelings that I should be chained to a desk 24/7?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great one. And I think a lot of us have kind of felt this way, obviously, as evidenced by the fact that we are working about 3 more hours a day right now in this COVID epidemic, and, people are home. It kind of makes you feel like you can't shut down. But we want to make sure that you don't feel that way. You will be a better employee if you take breaks and refresh yourself. Nobody is going to get ahead by burning themselves out. So take a step away from your desk, even if it's just for 5 minutes, walk around your house, walk around your apartment, get outside on a patio, give yourself 5 minutes, feel refreshed. And then as soon as you sit back down at your desk, you will automatically feel better. And I think once that guilt is sort of alleviated, you'll feel better and you'll be able to get through the next couple of hours or however long it is. But at the end of the day, shut down. You're not staying in your office when you were in the office for 14 plus hours. You're not staying there until midnight. Just because your office is now in your home doesn't mean you should be sitting on your couch answering emails at 12 p.m. unless it's that fire drill that we talked about. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just have to give yourself a break, pat yourself on the back. You did a great job. You made it through, what are we at, day 7 of quarantine, and you're still here. So give yourself a break and, just take the time that you need, and don't be chained to your desk. You're not going to be a better employee for it.
Thank you, Lauren. Sahar, do you have any tips for employees with small kids trying to work from home while juggling childcare and homeschooling indefinitely?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I myself do not have kids. So I actually had to poll my community, and I asked a couple of bankers who are parents, and I read a couple of articles. So this is what I've gathered. Scheduling meetings around the time when your little one might be taking a nap. If you could possibly do that so that you can have some quiet time during the meeting, try to do that. I had one banker let me know that she likes to schedule activities for her kids the night before around her schedule. That way she knows what those periods are going to be, where she's going to be on meetings, she's going to be talking to people, so that her little one will be occupied with like an arts or crafts, or using her phone or her iPad for a learning application. They have all these really cool apps where kids can learn. So she said that that's worked really well for her. Also, having them do school lessons alongside you while you work, and then checking their work after you're done with meetings to kind of help keep them entertained and learning and just active mentally, so that they're responding well to the situation. And let's see, I've also heard from other parents that it's really important for you to communicate what's going on. Well, in normal life, you might feel hesitant to tell your manager, like, hey, like my little one, it might come into the room when we're on this meeting. Everyone is going through this right now. A lot of parents have their kids, or most parents have their kids at home right now. So just communicate what's going on. You could also have meetings with your kids and just explain to them, like, hey, I'm going to be in a meeting from this time to this time. Please don't come in unless it's an emergency. And when it's over, I'll come hang out with you for a little bit. Yeah, I feel like just really open communication with both your team and your kids will hopefully help make this a little bit easier. But obviously, plans can sometimes derail themselves when you have little ones. So just be patient and take it day by day.
Thank you, Sahar. The next one is for Boris. What is your advice on how I can manage remote staff that are in different states?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing that we've done, given our distributed team and culture, is very mindful of the standard working hours across all time zones, and schedule the bulk of the meetings to fall within that working hour demographic across all of them. So, middle of the day being that optimal space. I think just the mindfulness that your team is distributed across the country. There are differing standard working hours, and then focusing efforts in on whatever that overlap is for those high priority meetings or initiatives where people do need their physical time together. And then for the inverse of that, when people don't need to physically be together, there may be a follow-up question on this, but manage more to the productivity and the output rather than what you associate with physically seeing a team member working.
Thank you, Boris. So we'll turn it back to Lauren. The question that came in is, how can I stay focused on work with so many stressful things going on in my life and the world in general?
Sorry, I was muted. That's a really good question. And I think that one comes down to mindfulness. I know certain things that Sahar had talked about with making sure that you're keeping focus, whether it's, noise canceling headphones, or if you are a person that can function and work while listening to music. I know that the bankers have actually come up with like a really, really great work from home Spotify playlist. So if you do function well with music on in the background, I think that those are helpful. But again, everybody is kind of in this situation. So I think there's not really a right way to do it. Some of us have talked about those jokes where, there was one tweet and this woman had said, hey, the interesting thing about working from home with my husband is now I realize that he's a let's circle back guy. So if you're working from home with your significant other, I think you have to establish some boundaries. I've been working from home with my fiance, and we even met at work. So we've been working together for quite a while, and I think setting those boundaries, setting specific spaces where you're working and they're working in a separate space is going to be important. And keep your head down during work time, with the exception of the breaks that you're going to take, of course. But I think trying to focus on the task at hand is what's going to get you through the day. Sit down, get in, focus on the work, and then the sooner that you're done, that's when you can kind of decompress a little bit in the afternoon, which is going to be really helpful to get through the next day too.
Thank you. So we did answer this one a little bit in the slide deck, but what are some fun and creative ways to allow coworkers to connect socially, to blow off steam while they're working remote? And then the second part of the question is, how do you build and maintain a virtual camaraderie with an internal team while working remotely? So if Lauren, you can answer that, that would be great.
Sure. So some of the things that we have implemented here are virtual happy hours and virtual lunches. I know some of our clients have already started doing like water coolers where, you can just like pop in for 5 minutes. If you think about it, that's where you probably were doing the majority of your interacting with your colleagues, whether it was in the lunchroom or getting coffee or whatever. Do those things virtually. I mean, Zoom is alive and well, Skype, FaceTime. So I would pop into any of those. And then one of the teams here is actually doing, or last week they did a trivia night. And then next week they're doing game night. So there's a lot of really creative strategies that you can employ completely virtually, and that will kind of get you your people fix.
Thank you for sharing that. And then Sahar, if you can add on anything that you've seen or you've participated in activity-wise, that would be greatly appreciated. But also another question that came in was, what are some home office essentials everyone should have in order to create a productive workspace, even if you don't have room for a home office?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like a lot of people are trying to figure out those home offices right now, especially people who live in smaller apartments. I don't think there's anything that everyone should have. I think it's really depending on you. What makes you feel good? What's going to help keep you focused? If that's having a laptop stand and you have like a small amount of space, then I know a couple of people that have stands that fold into their laptop so that they lie flat when they're not using them. You could get a chair that helps with your posture, noise canceling headphones, AirPods. It's really whatever's going to work best for you. Some people use multiple monitors just like they do in the office. I sometimes have an iPad as like an extra monitor on the side. So it's really whatever's going to work best for you and your setup. Play around with it for a little bit and try to figure out, what you're missing, whether that's like an ergonomic mouse or a special keyboard. Yeah, it'll really vary person to person.
Thank you for sharing that, Sahar. Boris, what are your recommendations to establish accountability and guarantee that work is being done while people are working at home?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I could imagine to be a big struggle for those that are shifting from a physical work environment where productivity and accountability is associated with being seen, to one where we're all working from, to one where that team or company may be working from home, where that physical association isn't there anymore. Biggest piece of advice that I could offer is to shift your association with success or productivity away from physically seeing the work being done to what the output of that work is. We're in the recruiting business, and so for recruiting, it's less about seeing the person in front of their computer or seeing the person on their phone to what the data shows the output of that work is. And so that could be a number of people engaged with, some of the funnel metrics around submissions, or productivity thereafter. It could be something totally different for whatever business it is that you're in. It could be work produced if you're working through like a project or an initiative. So I think having that data is having that clearly shared and defined for your team is hugely valuable. So one, define it. Two, communicate it. Three, on the accountability pieces is track it. And then hold account, which is really kind of what accountability is. And so a really easy way for a team to do that is perhaps an end of week check-in to review what the actual accomplishments were as related to what was prescribed, or some version of like a public tracker where maybe as work is produced, everyone is able to see it. So there's visible eyes on it. Those would be the standard best practices. I would also just share that while we're all working and while at work, the goal is to be productive. I think there is an element of a human approach, given the challenge that we're going through, to kind of like relieve a little bit of that productivity and accountability to whatever degree is possible, just to give account to the personal or individual challenges anyone may be going through this period.
Thank you, Boris. Lauren, how can I ensure that I'm a valuable employee while working from home? What about like when work dries up?
This is a great question. I think especially because of the environment and what's going on outside, so many things feel like they're out of your control. But one thing that you can do is, if you are project-based, where your work actually has a start and an end, once you have finished that, all businesses need to be hands on deck. So if you can lean into the company and say, hey, I've got a lighter day today. What can I take on? What can I help out with? Are there any areas that we need research to be done? Or for us, obviously right now, being in recruiting, we're all looking into who our connections are, what networks we have, where else we can get involved. So if there's anything that's outside of your typical scope, ask if you can join in and kind of help out there. And that will obviously show that you're being proactive and you're taking the initiative and you really want to be helped. being able to help is an invaluable thing. So ask for the extra work if your typical load is pretty light, and then that will obviously give you something to do, and you'll feel valuable in turn.
Thank you. Another one for you, Lauren, is what are some things to keep in mind when starting an ERG while remote?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think starting an ERG, make sure that there is a need for it and that you feel like people would want to participate. So companies right now, obviously a remote ERG would be really, really helpful. So I would just, if you're on Slack, send a ping to one of your general channels and say who's interested in starting something like this. Get yourself a co-lead. Mine is awesome. I don't think I could do the remote group without her. So Sahar and I have some pretty great teamwork. We will always have a sync right before our sessions, talk about, hey, are we going to do unstructured or structured today? If we're going structured, we're going to come in with data points that we can talk about, or if we're talking about, what are best practices and tips, we've done that. I think the need is the most important thing, and then figure out what is going to work best for your employees. Are you doing, women in tech? Are you doing remote? Are you doing people of color? Like, there's so many awesome topics that will get so many people involved in a different way. You just have to find out what is the thing that everybody needs right now, come up with some topics, get it on the calendar, and just go from there. And if the first one isn't necessarily successful, ask for feedback, because everybody wants to have something that they can help out with. So feedback will be invaluable. And then just get it going, make the changes as you can. And as long as everybody feels like they have like an open source to be able to give their opinion and feedback and feel heard, I think that's really, really important.
Thank you, Lauren. This one's for you, Boris. How can we find a balance when engaging with ERGs virtually, when too much COVID-19 talk is demotivating and talking about other things just feels insensitive?
Yeah, that's a good question. A very real one, and I don't know that our companies necessarily solve that from a from a specific kind of parameters perspective. Techniques to create some boundaries around anything. In this case, COVID being that, might be if there's relegating a Slack channel perhaps to talking about COVID for those that are interested in engaging in that discussion, and encouraging the continuance of that discussion there. And that way, those that want to talk about it can; those that don't won't have to. Given that COVID might find itself into any discussion, it might be relegated to some part of that discussion. So let's openly maybe share in some part of how we're engaging or experiencing with COVID, and now let's move the agenda to something different. So I think my general answer to that is to create some boundaries, as you would with any other topic that you want to pay a ton of respect to, given that it's on people's minds, and also give some kind of like a beginning and end to, as it relates to your focus on, so that you can focus on whatever else may be important and pressing at the time.
I wanted to just jump in here really quickly. So last week, we actually had our first virtual happy hour for the company. Whoever could join did, and if they couldn't, then we've got another one this week for them to be able to join. But one of our bank managers came up with a really good topic for us to talk about, where we wanted to be mindful of the fact that we are all working from home and everybody is kind of stuck inside. So not completely avoiding the topic. So we had a 3 sort of prong thing that we were going to focus on. First, because it was happy hour, we talked about what we were drinking. 2, because you can't go out to eat, we were talking about what you are making. And 3, we talked about how we are specifically coping with what's been going on with COVID-19. So I think, like Boris said, being mindful of it in a certain situation, but also I don't want to sound insensitive by saying make light of it, but in certain situations, you talk about something else that takes away the heaviness of how it can sometimes feel. So if you come up with specific prompts when you have these events or when you're talking with your colleagues, I think it will make it a lot easier. So, hey, what are you making for dinner, but how are you coping is a really good way to sort of balance the two.
Thank you, Lauren and Boris. Another question that came in was during the presentation, Sahar mentioned when you return to the office, should we be thinking in terms of companies or organizations migrating permanently into a new way of working, remote as a default instead of office work? I think either Sahar or Boris can answer this one.
I'll jump on this one, Sahar, and then feel free to jump in if you want to add. I think the answer to this is I don't know / probably. It's impossible to tell what the future will look like because we don't know how long whatever this present is will last. All we know is what exists today. With that, knowing how companies generally work and respond to things, companies are probably, and teams and people are probably experiencing some version of challenge. And then they're also in some way experiencing some version of opportunity. And what I imagine will likely happen is some companies will experience more challenge than they want, and therefore will revert back to whatever it is that they did before. Other companies will appreciate whatever opportunity has been created through this, and then they'll adjust. And so, depending on what company you work for and how you're experiencing it, and openness of leadership, and the kind of general proactive and forced change that we're all going through right now, my prediction expectation will be that your world will look different at the outset of this than it did at the beginning of it, no matter where your world started in the beginning.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Boris. I think a lot of it will also depend on the employee letting their managers know if they really enjoy working remotely. Some people might say, "Oh my gosh, I'm never looking back. This is my favorite thing ever. I never have to drive my car into the office again." And some people might really, really miss going into the office, and they find that that's their most productive space where they go in and they think only of work. So yeah, I think a lot of it will really depend on companies being flexible and the individual themselves letting their managers know what they do or don't enjoy.
Thank you, Boris and Sahar. So we have 2 questions left. We have some time if anyone wants to add any more questions into the Q&A box. But this one's for Boris again. Any tips for a reduction in face time with leadership, lack of visibility into each other's activities and work silos?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's an opportunity in that question for both leadership and for whoever it is that finds themselves in non-leadership capacity. So leadership, knowing that their face time, their proximity with team may be lessened, and so it is encouraged and should be going out of their way to create that visibility in whatever way possible. It could be physical in the form of pop it into some of these team experiences that are happening, or being more visible on Slack or in any shape or form. Just knowing that company craves a leadership, and so taking that proactive step to be more visible. And then on the other hand, it's an awesome opportunity for the individuals, and I've seen so much of this where individuals are more proactive in their engaging with leadership. And I've received all sorts of notes that I would not have received otherwise. Whether it's, "Hey, how you doing?" or "Hey, I see you're up to this," or "Hey, did you notice that?" or whatever it is. And so there's a double-sided opportunity to kind of bridge that gap that might have naturally existed in whatever it is that we were used to prior.
Thank you, Boris. And then this one's for Lauren. If we go back to the data slide that we showed on post-COVID-19, like working from home, and how we are putting in 3 more hours per day. Did you read any data about if people are putting more hours in due to like the downturn in the economy and that they're trying to prove themselves more at their jobs, or was there another factor involved with that?
So they didn't actually have as much data as I would have liked in terms of backing up the numbers. I think it's a combination of things. Yes, I do think that the downturn in the economy is probably scaring people into thinking that they need to work longer hours. But I also think that when you work from home, sometimes you don't even realize what time it is. Sahar and I talked about this yesterday. I mean, we were pinging at the end of the day and we were like, wait a second, it's already 5 o'clock Central, and we didn't even realize because sometimes you are so caught up. You don't eat lunch, you don't take a break, you don't do anything because you're just in work mode. Whereas when you are in an office, you know, your colleague pops over to your desk or something happens and you get distracted. Whereas when you are working from home, I just don't think you pay as close attention to it. And obviously a lot of people were asking questions surrounding feeling guilty about taking a break. I think that just goes in hand more too. And also one of the other questions was about, you know, how do you prove that you're actually doing work? People sometimes think that if you are working for longer, it makes it seem like you're doing more, whereas you could technically just have your computer on and not necessarily working. So I think there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but I don't know for sure because they didn't actually provide the like questions as to what the people were doing or what their reasoning was behind it, unfortunately.
Thank you, Lauren. A couple more questions came in that looks like they're both geared for Boris. How do we make a case to our employer for being allowed to work from home versus going into the office every day? And this would be post-COVID-19. Some employers are against remote work, especially sales organizations.
That's a really good question. I'll share a little bit about the process that we went through, and then that this may include some tip. Two data points considerably helped us move away from a concept of physical in office and associating that with some form of better, and then feeling comfortable with the remote. One is the productivity component of it. So running a pilot and comparing the productivity of those working in a remote capacity versus those working in an in-office capacity. And so looking at the data helped us feel very confident that moving in a not necessarily remote, but for us, we moved into a distributed model where we had a couple of different employment models that made sense for whatever that local demographic was. So that's one. Look at the data versus whatever it is that feeling may be. And then the second one is looking at the trends and where the workforce is going, and where the workforce is going can also be associated with access to talent. And we found that moving ourselves away from like an over focus on local opened us up to such a plethora of talent and opportunity that just wasn't available when you focus only local. So that both of those are leadership decisions, and so you gotta respect that in whatever way your organization exists. But I think everyone can be empowered to share some data. Everyone can be empowered to raise to their manager, and then work with the organization in whatever way they're amenable to working with it to ultimately achieve that goal. And I think on the other side, if your employer isn't the one for you as it relates to working remote, I mean, just know that this is a pretty massive trend that I think what we're experiencing with COVID is only accelerating towards that distributed work model.
Thank you, Boris. And then the final question that came in is, how do I get managers and employees who are unaccustomed to daily stand-up meetings or providing written updates to adopt these behaviors?
Okay, that's a good question. I would say the best way to accomplish that is to have purpose, have purpose for why those are important, not just for you, but for your team. You could certainly kind of force it, but I think that'll have a less than desirable effect if the team isn't engaged and inspired to kind of follow along. If there's a purpose to a daily stand-up, like perhaps you're working through a sprint of activities, and that daily stand-up aligns to each person being able to share what they're working on, so that everyone else can be more develop, so everyone else can be more aware and then empowered to do better work for that next day. Then there's clear purpose. If the purpose of the stand-up is for everyone to feel like they have to say what they did, but there's really no benefit in anyone else knowing that, then it'll definitely come across the micromanagey, distrustful experience, and might miss the benefit that you're trying to achieve. So my short answer is find the purpose of it in it that your team will align with, and I think the rest will flow from there.
Perfect. Thank you all for answering the questions and asking some great questions. We have a couple minutes left. If there's anything, Lauren or Sahar, you'd like to add in to close us out. If not, we'll turn it over to Boris to close things out.
Yeah, thank you, Tani. Thank you so much for walking us through all that Q&A. And thank you, Sahar and Lauren, for sharing with us today, and all for joining us. Certainly some incredible tips, some incredible practices. Hopefully what we shared has benefited each and every one of you in some shape or form. I'll say that I've certainly benefited from some of these tips, and I think beyond the tips, hopefully we all benefited from just being together during this time and sharing in this experience together as a nice kind of exemplification of how to create kind of virtual camaraderie, how to create virtual experience, and how to add some value in a give-get fashion through this COVID experience that we're all very much dealing with. So with that, thank you again. Very much appreciate everyone's time, and enjoy the rest of your day.